Thank you for joining us here at Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And please join us each and every week as we explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga and keep sending in your questions, and we'll explore those stories together. Like, follow, and subscribe and stay up to date on all things heritage with Heritage Mississauga. For this week's episode, we're going to explore an exciting project here at Heritage Mississauga, something that is newly in the ground. If you have a chance to visit the pier at JJ Plaus Park in Port Credit, you will see a brand new series of 10 interpretive plaques that look at kind of the timeline history of the harbor and of the Credit River, and some of the significant heritage stories connected to its evolution over time. To give you a little bit of background on the project, the idea to create the initial idea was the business of the Credit River, but its evolution over time, particularly focused on the port, and to explore that through a series of interpretive plaques. We have to give a hat tip here to those that have contributed greatly to this project over time. They include our graphic designer, Heather Bowden, and their input and editing expertise in Kathy Baker, Omar Sharif, and Richard Collins, as well as many others, and of course our team here at Heritage Mississauga. So the series itself really kind of in loose form follows more or less a chronology, if you will, from the early indigenous roots of the Credit River and of the harbor, or the mouth of the river itself, into the development of the harbor, the harnessing of water power further upstream with the development of mills, shipping and fishing industries, the stonehookers, the legendary stonehookers, of course, a memorial to sailors that are known to have been sailed out of Port Credit and lost on Lake Ontario, commemorating also the original lighthouse, which once stood just offshore underneath what is now JJ Plaus Park, which itself was created through landfill. Also the changing port over time, and ultimately this story of the Ridgetown, the famed lake freighter, which forms the scenic breakwall at JJ Plaus Park. So just, to give you kind of a brief overview of the project itself, it evolved and expanded as we worked on it to ultimately come up with the 10 different interpretive plaques, and kind of organize the corresponding heritage imagery to support the narrative of each plaque. And some of them, the earliest one, of course, dealing with the indigenous roots and focusing on the stories of the Mississaugas who engaged with the Credit River and the mouth of the Credit River for thousands of years, and just how the river tied to the way of life historically with fishing and places for harvest a little upstream for wild rice and cranberries, and vital routes of early transportation. We also focus on a story of in 1796 of John Graves Simcoe, the then Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, together with his wife, finding shelter at the Credit River, and they made an excursion a short distance upstream where Elizabeth Simcoe made a sketch of the Credit River Valley, and that was 1796. Also, just about that time, when it was determined that a government inn would be established at the mouth of the Credit River, which was built in 1798, our first building in what is now Mississauga. Also looking at the transfer of lands between the Mississaugas and the British Crown by way of treaties, treaties that were reached with Provisional Agreement 13A in 1805, which was agreed upon in Treaty 14, which is known as the Head of the Lake Treaty, signed in September of 1806. And followed by the acquisition of the Credit Indian Reserve lands by the Crown, which were surrendered in 1820 under Treaties 22 and 23. Really, the earliest development of the harbor proper, as we know it, comes in 1834 with the Credit Harbor Company, when it was established, building docks, wharves, and warehouses, and also one of our earliest boats or schooners to sail out of Port Credit, known as the Credit Chief, which was launched in the early 1840s. So very much, the people have interacted with the mouth of the Credit River itself, and the harbor, whether it's the natural harbor or the subsequent man-shaped harbor, if you will, for generations upon generations of people. One of the things we find perhaps I found most intriguing about this project was actually the examination and the documentation of the different bridges that have crossed the Credit River over time. Of course, as we travel along Lakeshore Road today at the Credit River, we cross over the Lakeshore Road Bridge, but not realizing perhaps or not considering that there have been many other crossings of the bridge itself. The first bridge to cross the Credit River here was made in 1832 of logs, and it did not last very long, and it was replaced by a wooden bridge that allowed for smoother access within a few years. The second bridge remained until 1850 when it was washed away in a spring flood, and then in April of 1850 a temporary bridge was erected, a floating bridge, until a new bridge could be built, and it was replaced by an iron bridge in 1851, and that bridge, the iron bridge, lasted from 1851 to 1895. Another bridge, a replacement bridge, was built out of iron again in 1895 by the Peterborough Bridge and Engineering Company, and it remained in use until 1919 when Lighthouse Road was paved and widened. While the new bridge was being built, a temporary floating bridge, or a Bailey Bridge, was then used. The fifth permanent bridge was completed in 1919 and was a high arch reinforced concrete bowstring bridge. And so that bridge remained for 40 years, from 1919 until 1959, when the widening of Lakeshore Road again required its replacement. And the new 4-lane bridge that we see today opened in 1960, and it is the sixth permanent bridge to cross the Credit River on Lakeshore Road. So that was, to me, one of the more fascinating parts about this exploring the topic of kind of the evolution of the harbor itself. We do know that the Credit Harbor Company, again in 1834, they began to, in what they called, improve the harbor and open it up for accessible navigation purposes. The river channel was deepened and dredged out, and silting has always been an ongoing challenge with the Credit River for boats navigating the harbor. The commercial fishery also began in Port Credit in the 1830s and lasted for more than 160 years. The fishery, combined with the stonehooking industry, connected people of Port Credit to the ebbs and flows of life tide on the waters of Lake Ontario. The harbor lands were ravaged by fire, the Great Port Credit Fire of March 31st of 1855, and it destroyed a great deal of businesses and warehouses on the west bank of the harbor. And it took some time for the community to rebuild. They suffered another setback with another fire 30 years later, but again, the community once again rebuilt. As a commercial and industrial port, Port Credit saw its peak of activities between 1870 and 1900, when both the stonehooking and the fishing industries were in full swing. Over time, it became home to the Port Credit Yacht Club in 1936, which was based out of the harbor until 1990, when they moved to the Lakefront Promenade Park. And the harbor is now home to the Credit Village Marina, so still a nautical tie to this historic harbor here in Mississauga, continuing that use of people in the harbor, at the water, etc. One of the other plaques deals with kind of the industrial history of the river upstream, and that is how water has been harnessed over multiple generations to power water-powered mills, particularly saw and grist mills, along with they were often the catalysts for development of early villages. Most of the mills do not survive, but it does connect to the Credit River being a source of natural water power for early industry. Being a harbor itself, Port Credit was very much tied to kind of the shipping industries of shipping goods abroad, and it really kind of a fascinating element of it is something like the origins of Stave Bank Road, where staves or wood was collected north of Lakeshore Road along what was on Stave Bank Road, known as staves, and in the along the frozen banks of the river, and then in the spring thaw they would be floated down to the harbor and loaded into ships for transport. And you know, other things like the fisheries, for example, we had early motorized fishing tugs, the Audrey Jean, the La Roca, the Marion, and the Naomi, all called Port Credit home in the 1930s into the 1950s. And of course, different fisheries over time. Atlantic salmon, which were last recorded in 1897, and then in the early 20th century, Chinook salmon were introduced, followed in 1969 by coho salmon. Other fish that were commonly caught here included trout, herring, and whitefish. Again, boats by the dozens once sailed out of Port Credit. The 1950s saw the decline of the commercial fishery and the gradual end of the fishing industry. Once familiar sites along Port Credit's waterfront included the fish shanties, ice houses, and drying nets, and they're largely kind of a memory from our past today. And in the winter months, when the river froze, ice was harvested for being kept into the warm months in ice houses. Something that we don't really connect with on our landscape today. And you know, using the river for its bounty, whether it would be the things that are harvested out of the river or for transportation, or in the winter months for the harvesting of ice. One of the, I guess, legendary aspects of life at the Credit River and other historic ports in Ontario and on Lake Ontario was the stone hooking industry. And stone hooking really was about the harvesting of Dundas shale from the lake bottom, of hauling that shale up on small skiffs, loading them the stone, the Dundas shale onto schooners, and the schooners then sailing into Toronto to sell their wares, organized into what was a twist, large rectangle bundles of stone, unloaded at various wharfs in Toronto and sold for $3 a twist. It was backbreaking work, this harvesting of shale with hooks. Hooks were dangled into the water. The loose shale was pried up in long flat stones, hoisted to the surface on the small skiff, and then by way of an A-frame, hoisted onto the deck or into the hold of the awaiting schooner. Those ships themselves were also called, they were the stone hookers. That referred to not only the sailors who operated them, but the ships themselves. And again, it was backbreaking work. It was manually hauling stone. And most of that stone made its way into foundation work in the growing city of Toronto. Thousands of tons of stone were mined from the shallows of Lake Ontario and the shoreline around Port Credit and Bronte and Oakville and beyond. But Port Credit was really one of the hubs of the stone hooking trade. Some of the boat names: the Anne Brown, the Ariad, the Arthur Hanna, the Defiance, the George Dow, the Lilliphone, the Maybelle, the Mary Ann, Mary Ferguson, the Olympia, the Raleigh, and the Rapid City, and others. Some of the two probably most familiar names with the stonehookers were that of the Lillian and the Newsboy, which could carry 30 tons of shale apiece in a trip. The stone again was piled into rectangles 3 feet high and 6 feet wide, 12 feet long, which were called the twist, and they could be sold between $3 and $5 per each twist. 3 trips a week and 2 twists per trip were considered a good output for an average 2-man crew. The stone hooking trade declined as deposits were depleted. And they also instituted a 3-rod rule that stonehookers could only operate a little bit distant from the shoreline in order to protect the eroding shoreline from the disappearance of stone. One of another plaque in the series deals with ships that were lost on Lake Ontario sailing, and the stone hooking and fishing were fraught with danger. Ships were lost, sailors were lost. Some of the ships that sailed out of Port Credit and other local harbors that were lost on Lake Ontario included the Augusta, the Bark Swallow, the Brothers, the Coronet, Jesse Drummond, Maggie Hunter, Morning Star, P.E. Young, Pinta, and Sampson, amongst others. And several sailors that sailed out of Port Credit also were lost on Lake Ontario, never to be found. And we do have a plaque there that lists their names and pays homage to their time on Lake Ontario and out of Port Credit, and a place that they never came home to at one point in time. We also commemorate the location of the original lighthouse, built in 1882. The lighthouse was operational for the 1883 season. It was decommissioned. The lighthouse was operational until 1918 when it was decommissioned, and the old lighthouse was accidentally burned in 1936. And so for a long period of time, the lighthouse was the safe beacon for those seeking to enter the historic harbor at Port Credit. Over time, the port, of course, has changed with landfill developments and the development of what would become JJ Plaus Park. JJ Plaus himself was a counselor in Port Credit, John Joseph Plaus, who lived between 1911 and 1966. He served on the Port Credit Town Council from 1959 to 1966. And he was deputy reeve in 1965 and reeve in 1966. And he passed away while in office, and the community rallied, and the new landfill operation, which would later bear his name, for park improvement, for harbor improvements, was in process at that point. And it was determined that the park would be named after him in his memory because he was a champion of the new harbor developments. Again, the harbor has changed over time, largely with the development of what is JJ Plaus Park, and the new breakwall. Canada Steamship Lines briefly called Port Credit home with the large lake freighters. And that was redeveloped in time for the Port Credit Marina. The harbor is still a functioning entity today, still walking in the footsteps of the past. Again, Port Credit has been a harbor for sailing vessels since 1834, at least when the Credit Harbor Company was formed, but even earlier as a natural refuge from the lake itself. But in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the major developments were underway to kind of improve the ability for Port Credit to maintain a marine traffic base. One of the significant landmarks that is in the Port Credit harbor area and very visible from JJ Plaus Park is, of course, the Ridgetown. And we get a lot of questions on the Ridgetown, actually, and we've answered some of them previously here on Ask a Historian, but we do finally have a plaque that tells visitors the story of the Ridgetown and that iconic landmark. The Ridgetown itself was built in 1905 as the SS William E. Corey by the Chicago Shipbuilding Company, and she served as the flagship for the Pittsburgh Steamship Company and sailed out of Cleveland, Ohio. She made her maiden voyage on April 12th of 1905, and she was one of the ships caught in the infamous Matoffa blow on Lake Superior of November 28th of 1905. And it was a hurricane force storm that damaged many ships, and the William E. Corey was actually driven aground. But she survived and continued to sail the Great Lakes for over 54 years. In 1963, the Corey was sold to the Upper Lakes Shipping Company and renamed the Ridgetown. The aging Ridgetown served in a diminishing capacity for several years, but she was laid up in Toronto at the end of November of 1969. In 1970, she was sold to the Canadian Dredge and Dry Dock Company of Toronto and was brought to Nanticoke, where she served as a temporary breakwater. Later refloated, the Ridgetown was brought to Port Credit on June 21st of 1974. She was loaded with stone and cement and sunk to become a permanent breakwater at the mouth of Port Credit Harbor. And the ship registry for the Ridgetown was closed on June 19th of 1974. But the beloved Ridgetown has become a very familiar landmark for those in and around the Port Credit and, of course, Mississauga area. Something very recognizable, and has been present in that location as a breakwater since 1974. So again, we do invite you, if you have a chance, to come and traverse JJ Plaus Park and see the new series of interpretive plaques. Take some time to read and view the pictures and meander down the memories of yesteryear with us as we explore the history of Port Credit Harbor, the Credit River, and of course the community of Port Credit. Again, special thanks to our team here at Heritage Mississauga who have brought these series of plaques to life. And also special thanks to Ward 1 Councillor Stephen Dasco for his tremendous support of the project and for being on hand for the installation of them. It was great to chat with Councillor Dasco about the importance of local history and remember back onto the name origin of JJ Plaus Park, John Joseph Plaus, a late councillor of Port Credit before amalgamation. So again, if you have a chance to go down to JJ Plaus Park, we do highly recommend you take a visit when you have time, and perhaps when the weather is nice, to have a walk along the pier and meander down local history. So thank you for exploring this exciting new project with us here at Heritage Mississauga. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, and each and every week, please send in your questions and we will explore the stories of the city of Mississauga together. Please follow, like, and subscribe and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. And thank you once again for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian. And finally, best wishes to all our friends and family and all those listening for all the best of a holiday season, for a safe and healthy Christmas, and all the best for the new year. Thank you.
And here we are in JJ Plaus Park on this cold December morning, and the series of 10 interpretive plaques that explore the story of Port Credit Harbour have been installed here in JJ Plaus Park, and you have a chance to come down and see them yourself. They start right from adjacent to Snug Harbour Restaurant out to the end of the pier, and they explore the timeline history of the park right from of the harbour, right from its indigenous roots to the crossing of the river through the development of bridges over time, to the sailors, the stone hookers, the commercial fishery that have sailed out of this harbor in time, to the creation of the park that we know today, and including a story of the original Lighthouse and the Ridgetown, the former Great Lakes freighter that forms the breakwall at the end of Port Credit Harbor, all told in the series of these interpretive plaques here in JJ Plaus Park. Special project by Heritage Mississauga. Special thanks to our graphic designer Heather Bowden, and also to Ward 1 Councillor Stephen Dasco for his support of this project. And so again, you can come down to JJ Plaus Park now and see the plaques, go on a walk down the breakwall and along the pier, and see the plaques like these that explore the timeline history of Port Credit Harbour.